Bitter Tweet, written by Nico Tatarovich. Read by Jack D.
Hello, I'm Jack. I'm here to tell you a story that explores the jolly idea that Western culture is almost completely finished. It's called Bitter Tweet. They used to say that sarcasm was the lowest form of wit, but then someone invented Twitter. Now, even the greatest minds of our time have been reduced to obsessively trying to fit meaningless platitudes into 140 characters while pretending to listen to their increasingly disappointed lovers and friends. Darren Adams, or @DazPants80, as he called himself on Twitter, wasn't the greatest mind of our time. Yes, he had somehow managed to start up his own consultancy firm, but on the other hand, it was above a quick fit in Neasden. Still, you can't blame him for not predicting that 15 minutes after sending one single tweet, he would be the most hated man on the planet. Darren wasn't a hateful man, but recently he'd achieved nothing other than having developed the habit of firing smart-ass tweets at famous people with all the guile of one of those machines that posh people play tennis against. One day, he was sitting in a pub hunched over his phone like a dog gulping into a pond when something caught his eye. Someone had ironically retweeted an inane message originally posted by human pop haircut and international phenomenon Joachim Blieber. "In London, it rocks, lol," the bland little squirt had tweeted, probably as a manager crushed vitamins into his sushi. "Let us know when you're leaving, lol," Darren carefully typed out before hitting tweet. He smirked, put his phone on the table and began to wait for the virtual backslaps. Darren waited all of 10 seconds to check whether anyone had responded. Too soon, he thought, and tried to think about something else, this time managing 12 seconds without looking at his phone. Nothing. He hit refresh. Nothing. And again, in case it hadn't worked that time. Still, nothing. By now, Darren was aware that this was getting a bit desperate. He shook himself out of his digital trance and looked around. Almost everyone in the place was either looking at their phone or trying to not look like they were looking at their phone. One particularly lost soul was bent so unhealthily over his phone that he looked like he was grinning at his own genitals. "What an idiot," sniffed Darren, before catching a glimpse of himself in a mirror and realizing with some degree of shame that his own back had taken on the same mutant shape. "What have I become?" he thought. "Wasting my life, harming my body and mind, posting pointless messages on Twitter." And at that moment, Darren resolved that for this night at least, he and Twitter were finished. He put his phone in his pocket and looked around with renewed interest in his surroundings. What he didn't know is that Twitter wasn't finished with him. The initial wave of anger and abuse that flooded onto his timeline was almost charmingly hateful. "Screw you, Daz Pants," spat a 12-year-old girl guide, as 100 miles away Darren took a swig of disappointing house lager. "You are a pathetic, ugly loser and Blieber is God," claimed an apoplectic 14-year-old budding gymnast from Fife. And no sooner had Darren gone for his first wee of the evening when a bubbly orphan from Los Angeles was wishing that he'd die and burn in hell, you scumbag. No more than 30 seconds later, Darren's tweet had been retweeted 400 times to over 12,000 people, and by 4 minutes, he was on 40,000 retweets to an audience of over 3 million. Lone weirdos and faux militant groups alike began to pass around ideas of what kind of death should befall him. Some preferring a bullet through the head, and others that he be dissolved in a swimming pool of Coca-Cola surrounded by wasp nests. 5 minutes gone, and while Darren took to the pub quiz machine, the newspaper column-writing Twitterati were beginning to have their say. A Guardian columnist was first out of the blocks, tearing him a new morality arsehole with a witty knee-jerk article, stitched together from tidbits off internet forums. Meanwhile, a showbiz correspondent had reportedly punched his own keyboard in half in an apoplectic rage. Then the celebs started to wade in. "Darren Adams is the single worst person on the planet right now. Break his hands," suggested a national treasure. Darren was trying to ignore the withdrawal pangs. He mooched towards a bookcase just near his table, unable to remember the last time he'd read a good old-fashioned novel. Sadly, like everything else in the pub, it wasn't real. 6 minutes now since sending the tweet, and various details of Darren's personal life were trending, each with their own hashtags. Links to photos of him covered in sick, back when he had real friends. Needy, sexually explicit texts to ex-girlfriends. Someone even spelled the words "fuck off" on the pavement with the contents of his bin. Darren was still blissfully unaware of all this, and was by now stuck for ways to engage with the human world for the first time in months. He noticed an attractive girl from 2 tables down and thought about saying hello, but then noticed she was getting up from her seat and was walking angrily in his direction.
Good luck, you bastard. You're gonna need it,
spat the girl, heading straight for the door. Embarrassed and baffled, Darren glanced at his phone. Do not check Twitter, he thought. It's only been 5 minutes. Oh, this is pathetic. Oh, sod it. His thumb agonised over the Twitter app and was preparing to dive when a text arrived from his mum. "What have you done?" it shrieked, in capital letters as mum texts tend to. Startled and cowed, he tentatively replied, "I don't know. What have I done?" Just then, a brick came flying through the window, landing at Darren's feet. He peered out to see a red-faced man being held back by his own daughter. A couple of police officers intervened and warned him to get back. And as a small crowd gathered, Darren started to feel vulnerable. "It's him! He's in there! Daz Pants, you twat! Who do you think you are?" The landlord activated the pub's steel shutters as heavy objects started to clatter against them. And through the slats you could just about match up the shapes and the sounds of what was being thrown. Shoes. A bin. A frozen beef carcass. A moped?
"I don't know who you are or what you've done, but you better leave!"
shouted the landlord, visibly shaking.
Me? I'm nobody. They can't mean me. Alright, maybe they do mean me.
Panicking, he tried to phone his mum. No answer. He tried his brother. Diverted. Nan, he thought. But she just answered the phone, shouted "Scam!" and hung up. With the blood all but gone from his face, Darren looked up to take in a deep breath. And it was then he first clocked the news on the pub TV. He blinked and tried to refocus. It couldn't be. But it was. His own face peered back at him. If you've just joined us, deadpanned a newsreader, the breaking story this evening, an internet troll who sent an offensive tweet to pop sensation Joachim Bleiber is under siege in central London. They cut to a shot of outside the pub. Someone had sprayed "Die, Twitter bastard!"
Shit.
thought Darren, grabbing his phone and noticing that he had 500,000 new, very angry followers. His timeline was now an appallingly brutal place. It's all very well having a report abuse button until you have to hit it 500,000 times, he thought to himself. There were threats from teachers, cake decorators and taxi drivers, and hundreds of invitations for him to have his head kicked in if he thought he was so bleeding hard.
I didn't mean anything by it.
He shouted pointlessly at his phone and set about trying to find the right words for a response tweet. But getting out of this hole wasn't going to be so easy. His account had been frozen. Now being hopelessly addicted to Twitter, this would have agitated Darren at the best of times. But now, with a tidal wave of hatred spewing towards him and Twitter being the only medium that gave nobodies like him a voice, you could comfortably describe it as a fucking disaster. Bleiber Camp is making way to pub for showdown, screamed a breaking news banner on the TV.
Shit! Shit, 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 shit! This is crazy! Can't you just let me escape by the roof?
It's no use, mate. Helicopters are out.
A deafening cheer went up outside the pub, and then 1 second later on the TV.
God, they're here.
With a flurry of clicks and flashes, the now highly secure entrance to the bar was transformed into a red carpet of pure hatred. Surrounded by flunkies, Bleiber was harried through the door to murderous shrieks and screams. Joaquin was brought forth like a child king from more exotic climes, but in a baseball cap. A lady came forward. Okay, so we can make all this stress and negative feedback go away. All we need to draw this issue to a close is for you to just apologise to Joaquin. Cool? Yeah, cool. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. And just to explain, no time to talk. Joaquin has a pretty full schedule today, so if you could just apologise into this camera, we'll send out a response tweet and it'll all be cool. Cool? Cool? Cool. Oh, and we need you to put this t-shirt and hat on. Fine. And so, 11 minutes after Darren had sent a vaguely offensive tweet to Joaquin Bliba, he found himself on his knees begging him for forgiveness in front of some TV cameras. And action. I'm sorry. Cut. Okay, let's get the acceptance suite sent and get out of here. A lackey dutifully typed out the words "Das Pants is forgiven" and handed the phone to Bliba, who hit tweet. Around a minute later, the circus had gone. Outside, the angry drunken men staggered away. The police began to withdraw their guns and batons, and the clean-up operation began. Darren was a nobody again, and he almost felt offended. Minute 15 now, and the pub was already more or less back to its soulless former self. Darren wondered what he felt like. He didn't feel anything. He sat down, caught his breath, and nervously checked Twitter on his phone. His account had been unfrozen, and it was down to a measly 87 followers. A combination of relief and bemusement washed over him. What was it all for? Why had it happened? What did anything mean anymore? Just then, one solitary tweet arrived. It was from a new account with no profile picture and 0 followers. It simply said, "Thank you for participating in Joaquin's campaign. We have now reactivated your account." "Hey?" muttered Darren to himself, and took an almighty swig of his lager. 4 pints later, Darren woozily glanced up at the pub TV and saw something terrible.
You are forgiven.
It was himself, on a TV ad, kneeling before Joaquin Bliba, who was bathed in a sort of heavenly light. The camera cut to a close-up of Darren. His plain t-shirt was now emblazoned with a powerful single-word caption, "Forgiven."
You are forgiven.
"Forgiven," a voiceover announced, as Darren's mouth fell open. The new album from Joaquin Bliba. Bliba's people had orchestrated the whole thing. They'd fanned the flames of hatred, they'd frozen his account, and they'd fleeced him like the sheep he was, and all to sell a few units of prepubescent pop music from a singing fringe. As he sat slumped with his bruised ego and his empty pockets, he stared a dead man's stare out of the pub window. Just then, a little bluebird landed on the back of a chair outside. It tweeted once and then flew away to a life of aimless freedom. Well, I hope we've all learned something from that story. I have. I've learned that intelligent debate is dead, and the information superhighway is like a hate-filled roller coaster that doesn't have any seatbelts.